Hi, my name is John Janeshig from Mirantis. With me today is Kathleen Moyer, Director of Service Delivery at Corsec Security, and William Konitzer, Senior Solution Architect at Mirantis. Both my guests were deeply involved in enabling the recently released DISA STIG for Mirantis Kubernetes Engine. That's the Defense Information Systems Agency Security Technical Implementation Guide. The purpose of this conversation is to give insight about the STIG process, what was entailed in preparing for submission to DISA, what the STIG comprises in technical terms, and how it can be put to use by public sector, enterprise, and other folks who want to use MKE to provide highly secure applications and services. Kathleen, William, welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can you describe for me Corsec's role in helping Mirantis achieve the DISA STIG for MKE?
Sure. So Corsec for the last 25 years has been working in security certifications. And so we work as a consultant with clients like Mirantis, and we help to evaluate the system. We help to work through the processes with the companies. And so our role in this was to be that consultant, was to be the expert, but to also do some initial testing to help prepare them for it, and to do the government interactions with DISA to make sure that things kept moving along.
And so, kind of in a stepwise way, how does this all start? What are the initial steps Corsec takes when beginning a STIG certification process for something like MKE?
Yeah, so our initial steps are that we need to familiarize ourselves with the system, right? So we may have used Mirantis and some other testing, right? But we need to get to really know the system. So we work with people like Will to get the system set up for us and to understand the system. And then we start to make sure that we scope out exactly what components are going to be included in the STIG and what things maybe would be useful to cover in a different manner.
So you do this a lot, obviously. You know, your business circulates around facilitating this kind of process for, I imagine, a wide range of extremely complicated, maybe some of them are simple, but mostly extremely complicated technology products. What are common challenges that people beginning a STIG certification process can particularly encounter, and how do you folks help, clients overcome them?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge for almost everybody initially is just being able to translate government speak and government requirements into what that looks like for your developers. That if you just sit and read the requirements, sometimes they don't make sense to you. So we really work with the developers to understand what do those requirements actually mean, what do they need to see in their system. So that's one thing for sure. And then process-wise on a STIG, you have to have a DoD sponsor and get approved for the process. So helping Mirantis to work through getting a sponsor and doing that initial engagement with DISA is another hurdle that seems like it should be simple, but it usually becomes one of the most complicated parts of starting.
How did Corsec ensure that the security controls recommended would end up being both effective and practical for implementation?
Yeah, so that's a really important thing to consider as you're going through. So we do an initial testing against the controls where we're finding where there are gaps and what different things can be applied for them. But oftentimes we'll suggest something and then Will would take a look at it and we would go back and forth and we would try and figure out what was practical, what was useful without breaking any of the security and still meeting the controls. And there's often a lot of gray area in there. So it's important to take that time to do the initial check, talk with the developers and make sure that they make sense, and then find that happy medium wherever we can.
This implies that Corsec certainly has a great deal of, a vast amount of knowledge on, DISA requirements and data security standards and best practices in general. How do you keep updated with all of this stuff?
Sure. A large part of how we keep updated is by continually working on these processes with different products. So something that I learn doing this to work with Mirantis will help the next customer, the next client that I'm working with on the next product. But we also attend different conferences and have frequent phone calls and communications with the folks at DISA trying to get particularly thorny issues explained and answered for us.
And do they tend to be responsive? Do they give you the kind of feedback that you need in a pretty timely and expert way?
They do tend to be responsive as long as you're asking a very specific question. You can't ask a very open-ended question.
Well, it's interesting. I guess everything about legislation, including technical standard setting, is somehow related to the process by which laws are made, right? A lot of it is precedent, establishing precedents and then
Yes.
interpretation, and it's a slow evolutionary process, and you have to leave gray areas because otherwise things really would break. It's not a, it's not deterministic. Security is a big enough space that you can't be entirely deterministic about it.
Absolutely.
So then the human factors involved in mounting an effort like this to get a STIG created and then approved, pretty complex as well, right? There's a large number of technical moving parts and various experts, maybe with overlapping or non-overlapping domains of expertise. How do you ensure that everyone on both sides, or maybe three sides if you include the folks at DISA, are aligned through the process of applying and eventually, hopefully, getting such a certification?
Sure. So it definitely does need to involve all three parties to get aligned. Initially, we start with just Corsec and Mirantis working together, and we had weekly calls to check in, as well as reviews of information back and forth. But in those weekly calls, we would discuss areas that either we weren't understanding properly in testing, or areas where they weren't understanding our results very well. So we had a lot of communication back and forth on how these STIGs were getting applied. And then when we started to engage with DISA, we had conversations with their tester. And often those were kind of live conversations as she was on the system and running through checks and showing us errors that she was coming into. So there was a lot of phone calls together, and even we used Slack a little bit to be able to kind of take care of those quick and easy things. So
How does Corsec help with security testing preparation, for STIG compliance projects?
yeah, so we absolutely have a system that we have access to, and we're running through the controls. We're first just identifying gaps, and then once we've identified gaps and talked with Mirantis, then we're looking at applying the different configurations to make sure that they've addressed the issue, and then giving them advice on different ways to address the different controls, because sometimes there's multiple different ways that you can address it. Sometimes you're using something in the environment, like maybe you're using IDP to provide authentication rather than providing all the authentication concerns yourself in the product. So just talking through those different areas where we can use different resources to address some of the controls.
Um, do you differentiate at Corsec when working with Kubernetes-based products as compared to any other type of software, operating systems, or something else that you might be asked to help prepare for certification?
Yeah, so government requirements tend to not get updated very frequently. So one of the difficulties in working with a Kubernetes-based process is that you're often looking at a control that's written for a server-based system, and you're trying to apply it to Kubernetes. So it's sometimes just trying to figure out how those requirements, how those controls apply to Kubernetes can be very complicated.
What are the key differences between a STIG certification, a very important and sort of pillar-like thing, and other security certifications like, well, FEDRAMP or ISO 27001?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different certifications that you can get. FedRAMP in particular is only for those cloud-based offerings. So when we're looking at STIGs, we're looking at more of an on-prem offering, because that's what they're designed to address. The STIG process is also helping that end user, helping that DoD customer to be able to deploy this system in the secure manner, where the other certifications are more looking at, are you capable of doing the various security controls, but they're not really giving that end user the information on how they can implement all of these controls. So it really does enable your end DoD customers to have a be able to use the system in the way that it's intended for the DoD.
It impressed me when I dug into the STIG, which I did at a pretty deep level using not only STIG Viewer, but AI tools and other things to sort of parse out the XML. How very implementable the whole recipe is. It's a large number of controls, but they're superbly organized. They're all intercorrelated and indexed to different frameworks of standards and so on. So you can trace all the way back to sort of where did people start thinking, in the standards process? Where did this control actually come from? What was the original thought? And how have we gone through layers of interpretation? And then it's all documented to the point where a person, with moderate proficiency in sort of Linux command line and basic CLI can implement the controls. It's right there.
Yes.
So that impressed me. I mean, security that everyone is scared to implement because it's too complicated, or they don't feel sure, that they have implemented a control, that they can't confirm that a control has been implemented in a running system. That's the end of security right there. If you have information poverty and
Right.
and problems like that. So it's a superior job of documentation, among other things.
Yeah, and it does not only provide you the method of checking to confirm whether or not this control has been met, but how to fix it if it hasn't been. So if your system is misconfigured and you find that misconfiguration, you're not just stuck wondering, what do I do now? It gives you those immediate steps to take to be able to remedy the situation.
And then collectively, I assume that a lot of people, including Mirantis, will end up automating this process.
Yes.
So that the all of the checks and audit controls can be confirmed, and unimplemented controls will be implemented automatically, and you'll have a gold star of approval at the conclusion of the process.
Absolutely. And we had a lot of discussions with the DISA tester about where things could be scripted, because she definitely knew that in the field, that's what's going to happen the most time, is that these end up becoming scripts. Yeah.
So how does Corsec handle when updates and changes happen in products during a certification process? All this stuff evolves so rapidly.
The timeline, like you said, takes multiple months to go through this STIG process, and Mirantis is continuing to develop and continuing to make updates. So we we start on a particular version, doing our testing, but as those updates happen, we'll make sure and wrap any of those changes in. We'll talk with Will and his team about what was changed in those versions, so we know what areas to focus on as we're going back through the testing. But even post STIG, we are we're talking with Mirantis, with vendors. We're trying to make sure that they're continuing to look at all of these controls on each release, making sure they're all still valid. And DISA also does a review. Quarterly, they're reviewing STIGs, but I would say maybe once a year, they'll be looking at any particular STIG. So this Mirantis STIG, to see if anything needs to be updated there.
What general advice do you have for companies that are starting to consider STIG for certification, either, I guess, as potential Corsec customers or as people who would use a product like MKE in something larger that they hope to use in public sector, or for which they have particularly high security considerations?
I think one of my first pieces of advice for people who would be using this STIG and using Mirantis is to look at the overview that's been written, so that you can understand the thought process we were using as we were putting together the STIG, and then to make sure that you're going through all of these checks, making sure that they've been applied properly before you're integrating the system, because it can be difficult once it's in the full system to try to get everything working properly. So getting it secured and hardened, and then working on it together. And if you're looking at going into the STIG process, I would say the first step is to really just start thinking about what specifically your business needs are to have that STIG for, so that you can focus on one particular thing. And it's probably too much to bite off to look at your whole product line. You want to focus initially on a smaller component.
So control for complexity, you know,
Yes.
at the outset. So so how does your partnership how would you describe your partnership with the Defense Information Systems Agency and DoD? And how does this influence your approach to helping companies like Mirantis achieve, these various compliance stages?
Sure. So our our partnership has grown over the years. I've been working in this field for about 12 years now, and initially there wasn't a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversation, but the more we meet with the folks at DISA, the more we talk with and work with the folks at DISA, the better relationships we start to build, and then we can start to reach out and ask questions. And um, recently, there's been a lot of kind of chaos going on in the FIPS 140-3 field, and the folks from DISA have reached out to us to ask us our opinions of what's happening and what's the reality of the situation so that they can get another data point, because they know that we are constantly dealing with the same issues as well. And so, we can help each other out on different areas, and that's really helped to grow and build that relationship so that it's easier to ask those questions. It's easier to make sure that we're getting good data from them.
So both of you, can you discuss the importance of documentation in the STIG certification process, and how is that managed? A lot of what the STIG appears to be, even down at the level of the XML, is documentation. Fundamentally, you are explaining in very precise, simple terms how to check and how to implement each control. Where does that come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So the government has put together some reference guides that we start to build the STIG off of. And they actually have very specific documentation processes that they want us to follow. So the initial engagement with DISA actually involves them looking at the grammar and the syntax that we're using in those commands to make sure that it's all being documented according to the standard that they need. So it's a very important part of the process after we've figured out the what we need to do, making sure that it's properly and accurately documented.
And is the goal of that to create documentation that's machine parsable, or
Yes.
have they simply done best practice, analysis of what gets the best results? So what can humans comprehend most easily in documentation to follow instructions accurately and implement security controls correctly?
It's a little bit of a combination of both. So there's certain just documentation standards that have to be followed, like everything needs to be a shall. You can't say you should do this or it'd be nice if you could do that, right? It needs to be definitive responses. But then there's also quite a bit that is specific to making it machine readable. There's certain characters that you can't use, and those types of things, because it would be a problem for scripting and for machine readable.
Fascinating. So how does customer feedback influence? I mean, you two worked together for some months on this, and you had a lot of complex interactions. It's sounding like. How did that communication influence the certification process and the implementation of controls?
During the certification process, we were, talking to our customers at Mirantis. Uh, they come up with security requirements and concerns and operational challenges. So we take that feedback and we put it into our product, and then obviously Corsec and the DISA tester go through and test various updates. So that's sort of how we take the customer feedback and put it back into the product.
Oh, so
Yeah.
that's interesting. So Miranda's customer feedback actually gets incorporated
Yeah.
more or less in real time into the process of building
Yeah,
this.
it doesn't necessarily go straight into like, hey, this has got to be a STIG security feature, but things like encryption settings, how we do encryption at rest, that sort of stuff that does feed into the STIG when they test it. That does come, from customers who are doing their own testing and validations.
Hmm.
And then additionally, customers can provide feedback to DISA on the STIG itself if they're having issues with running some of the checks and those sorts of things. And those go back to the original person who we worked on the testing with. So sometimes if, she deals with those as much as she can. If she has a question or an issue, she comes back to us and asks us how it should be addressed.
William, can you provide an example of a challenge that your team faced during the certification process and how you folks collaborated together to resolve it?
Yeah, sure. I'd say the biggest challenge we had in working on this was updating the configuration to meet all the stringent security requirements they had, but making sure it didn't impact how MKE functioned and the usability of it. Specific example, container image signing. There was some gotchas around making sure that functioned correctly when we applied some of the STIG controls and it was still usable. So for us, we had to work quite closely with Catherine and the DISA tester to fine tune the configuration, go through lots of iterative testing and validation. And then at the end, we came out with all the required settings and still maintained, MKE performance and functionality.
It's interesting. So there are actually potential usability and performance impacts when security things are implemented, and the final STIG is actually the result of a process of improving the engineering of the product itself to be able to perform with controls in place. I wouldn't
go quite that far. It's just making sure that anything we didn't do wouldn't impact performance or functionality, and we were very careful to make sure that wasn't the case. So, by applying the STIG, you're not going to have any performance or functionality impacts.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, in other words, from the user's point of view, they will be little impacted unless they try to do something that runs up against a security precaution, in which case the control will take over and prevent them from doing that bad thing.
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of why you do the STIG. If the customer themselves is like, hey, we need to go and secure the environment securely and try to go off and do all this stuff themselves without the specific instructions and testing that we've done, they could go in and potentially,
break all their tool chains.
Absolutely.
Right.
And not realize they've done it. So as part of doing this, we've come up with the best way and best practice, and it's nice and easy to follow instructions that they can use to go and check stuff. And then if it's not set up correctly, it's got easy to follow instructions on how to correct it.
It's great to anticipate stuff like that. So William, can you provide an overview of the importance of achieving the DISA STIG for MKE?
Yeah, so I think achieving the DISA STIG for Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, the MKE, that's a pretty significant milestone for the company because it validates our commitment to security and compliance. The certification is going to be very critical for our customers in government and regulated industries. We're already seeing some of those customers asking to apply it. And it, shows our commitment to ensuring the product meets these stringent requirements.
You had mentioned some technical challenges that you had faced during the certification process. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, as we said just now, certainly most of the challenges are around doing the configuration and checking that it still provided the nice usability within our product. There probably weren't anything really significant apart from image container signing, because if a customer tries to run some signed images and the signing isn't there in the system, it just won't run. Mm-hmm. It's working out how to make that work easily and not break things when, they might have a product that has a mixture of signed and unsigned, and how you run that well and make it nice and easy to use, because we're focused about nice and ease of use within our products.
So can you share some insights into the specific security features of Mirantis Kubernetes Engine that are crucial for achieving STIG compliance?
So there's a couple of features that we have in MKE that I think are pretty crucial for this. Role-based access control. That's a fundamental security feature of MKE that helps manage who can access the platform within a cluster and the actions they can perform. So, by defining the roles and assigning the permissions based on the principle of least privilege, we can assure that the users and the services, they only have access to the services they need, minimizing the risk of unauthorized access. Another key feature that's also critical to the STIG is audit logging. So we have comprehensive audit logging built in, and that's obviously turned on as part of the STIG controls. So you can track and monitor all the activities within either the Swarm or the Kubernetes cluster. Another key feature is encryption. So Mirantis provides, as part of the product, FIPS 140-2, an encryption component. So that will make sure that all the communication inside and outside of the product is secured per the STIG requirements, and also the encryption for data at rest is secured the same way. And another thing, image security. So as I discussed, signing container images, we use secure container images that have a signature. So this way you can validate that they haven't been tampered with.
So what role did Mirantis play in the collaboration with Corsec to get the STIG certification?
So we provided a lot of in-depth technical knowledge about MKE's architecture and operations. So we're working closely with Corsec and the DISA tester to identify and implement the various security controls. And then we assist with the testing when they're trying to run certain commands. We validate all the documentation to make sure that the commands make sense, the controls make sense. Once it's all done, we do a final validation and go over all the final testing again to make sure that everything still works and complies with all the standards they're trying to achieve.
How does it work when a customer acquires MKE, perhaps because it has a STIG, but intends to use MKE to host applications that they hope will achieve ATO or higher orders of authorization for sale into the public sector? It's not as simple as implement the STIG and then put your application on it and Bob's your uncle, right? So what actually ends up happening?
So for the customer themselves, they're going to stick that application on a platform, and it's going to be validated from the top down. So from their application all the way through down to how the platform works, all the way down through to how their processes are for managing all of that. Now, where they can save themselves some significant time if you're deploying 5 or 6 applications is you don't want to have to do that for every 5 or 6 applications. So if you put it on a platform that up to a certain level is already certified to that, that means it's just the last layer. Their application, each individual application, they have to go through and do a bit of certification on, and they inherit all the inherent security controls and validation from the platform and operations and so on that they're running on.
Have there been situations where an application has made demands on MKE that have required a reinterpretation of STIG controls to make ultimate compliance in ATO possible?
Yeah, I think there has been in the past where, as customers have put their application on, it's gone through the certification, some changes have had to be made to the platform and security and controls that we do it. But that just enhances the overall, offering for when they deploy more applications. And it's an iterative process because every few months, they go through a review. And that's part of the ATO authorization. Every few months, you have to review it and make sure everything's up to date, or if new requirements have come out from the government, you have to, do ongoing continual security on it.
So I would imagine that quite a lot of kind of attentive, proactive, long-term support is required, to maintain this sort of deep stack of accountabilities with frequent audits and.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a simple shoot and forget and everything is good. And that's partly why, for our customers at Mirantis who have deployed this sort of stuff, the OpsCare Plus offering, where we're fully managed, is a bonus for them because we can take a lot of the load of operating at least our part of the platform off them. and do it.
What are typical timelines for achieving STIG certification, and what kinds of factors can influence these timelines?
So for this, I think there was a lot of back and forth, as Kathleen was talking about at the beginning, on the sort of political side, getting the sponsor, getting all the paperwork signed. I think that was maybe about 6 months. The actual testing for us was around about the 3 months mark to do all the testing and validation. You then submit it upstream to the government to get certified, and that was about another month or two on the top of that for them to validate everything that had been submitted. So maybe a good year, round and round. I'm sure you could potentially speed it up, but a year maybe from start to finish doesn't seem totally unreasonable.
Mm-hmm. What happens in terms of anticipating, managing, and mitigating the risk of new vulnerabilities that emerge after a product has been certified?
So internally, we implement, obviously, a continuous security scanning, monitoring, and response process. So we have regular vulnerability scanning as part of our build process and development process. We have automated patch management for lots of our tools and also for the product itself. We use threat intelligence tools to identify new threats as they come into the code. We connect it to a lot of CVS and upstream government databases that indicate responses. And generally, we just stay proactive and vigilant. A lot of customers will email us saying, "Hey, we just noticed the government posted this vulnerability. Is your product, is it impacted by this vulnerability or not?" We can provide quick responses to that.
How has going through this process and achieving STIG certification here? This is not the first product that Mirantis has had STIG certified, but I believe it's the first in the MKE product name line that has achieved full certification for DISA STIG. How has this process influenced Mirantis's overall approach to developing and securing potentially other products?
I think it definitely enhances our market position and reputation because it shows our commitment to the high security standards that's needed. It shows we can be a trusted provider of secure Kubernetes and Swarm, particularly in the government and regulated industries, finance and healthcare as well. It strengthens, and it's particularly, the customers that we do have that are in those industries, it's helped to strengthen our relationship because now they're going to go off and start applying this. And it's fed back into our other products that are not just MKE based, because obviously we've had to change how we do some of our internal processes for security, how we do our scanning, and where MKE is used in other products, we're going to apply the same sort of STIG controls. So it sets us apart from competitors in that regard.
So in fact, the engineering process discipline and quality around all of our core products seems to have been improved by this exercise, which hypothetically only affects the MKE architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely had a massive positive, definitely a positive approach internally to how we develop and secure things. It's helped embed a culture of security and compliance across Mirantis as we start to more rigorously embrace security practice and standards in our development process. And as we start now at prioritizing security pretty much from the earliest stages of development as we continue to seek and improve our security posture.
Thank you very much to Kathleen Moyer, Director of Service Delivery at Corsec Security, and to Mirantis Senior Solution Architect William Konitzer for being my guests today. For more about Mirantis Kubernetes Engine security and the MKE DISA STIG, please visit these links or contact us.